Hello everyone, EvanNova95 here, and welcome to another installment of Star Wars vs. Season 8. As you can probably tell from the title and thumbnail, today we will be discussing Darth Malak vs. Shaak Ti, specifically Knights of the Old Republic Malak and Force Unleashed Shaak. Now, this match is going to have some unique quirks. While I typically refrain from factoring external power amps into my analysis, Malak's breakdown will be centered around his end-of-game base form, as well as the strength he attained when the Starforge enhanced him during the game's climax. For the sake of consistency, I will also be taking into account Shaak's strength on and off of the planet Felucia, though to be blunt, the difference is negligible compared to Malak's forms. The primary purpose behind this discussion is to highlight the numerous ways in which Malak can be scaled, as well as to showcase just how far TFU Shaak scales above her prequel trilogy self, despite the downplay that occasionally gets thrown her way. As usual, content will be centered on the Legends continuity, with primary and secondary sources being taken into account. Statements made by creators will also be considered if they are reputable and do not drastically contradict the narratives presented in their stories. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Darth Malak was a human male, and while his exact birth date is never specified, we know that he was a peer of Revan's during their Jedi training, which would put him roughly in his late 30s by the time of KOTOR 1. As noted in the Essential Guide to Alien Species, humans were a highly evolved race with their most notable attributes being their intelligence, resiliency, and adaptability to a wide range of environments. These traits were not exclusive to them by any means, but they were still considered extraordinary by the overall galactic standard, allowing humans to become the most dominant species in the galaxy, to the point where they were often viewed as the standard by which the biology, psychology, and culture of other species were measured. Regarding his physical form, Malak was a pure warrior, which makes sense considering that he never neglected his training, and participated in numerous high-tier battles during the Mandalorian and Jedi Civil War. This upkeep somewhat reduced the severity of the degradation Malak experienced from his immersion in the dark side, though he still sported the yellow eyes and sallow skin common amongst Supreme-grade Sith. The Dark Lord also sported a vocabulator implant covered by a metal face guard, which he received after his lower jaw was cut off in his first battle with Darth Revan. Although their exact configuration is largely unknown, Malak's alchemaic cybernetics are stated to have made him stronger, not weaker, with his face guard buffing his defensive stats, albeit slightly. Moving into physical strength, this is easily Darth Malak's most impressive attribute. He is routinely cited for his immense physical power, with KOTOR's lead writer Drew Karpyshyn referring to him as the, quote, brawn to Revan's brain, which could imply that Malak was physically stronger than Revan even as his Sith apprentice. Darth Revan's defeat of Apprentice Malak could run counter to this statement, however, we don't know how that duel played out. And the two should be relative in strength regardless, since Malak is stated to have given his master a desperate fight. This is extremely impressive considering that Darth Revan is noted to have been the most powerful Sith in history at that point in the timeline. Jumping to KOTOR, Prime Base Malak would overpower Bastila Shan on the Leviathan, and later clash with end-of-game Jedi Revan on the Starforge long enough to break away and power up. Starforge Malak would proceed to give Revan an extreme diff fight despite losing. Not a bad look for Malak, given that Jedi Revan is confirmed to be far stronger than he had ever been as a Sith. Darth Malak's speed follows an identical line of scaling to his strength. He was fast enough to press Darth Revan long before his prime, with Prime Malak's combat speed being sufficient to contend with a much more powerful Jedi Revans, both in base and with the amplification of the Forge. He did still get hit by Shan's saber throw despite having time to react, but that could have just been because he knew he could tank it. Scaling Malak's stamina is tricky due to his limited feats, but by no means impossible. As a Jedi, Alec endured military campaigns against the Mandalorians, including prolonged torture at the hands of the mad scientist Demigol, which would necessitate high-tier endurance. Darth Malak never displayed any major signs of fatigue during his final battle with Revan in-game, with his Starforge amp replenishing him with each use. Again, these variables make Malak's threshold difficult to gauge. However, Karpyshyn has gone on record saying that a book adaptation of this fight would have been a, quote, brutal, hard-fought affair spread over multiple pages. So I think it's safe to say that his tenacity was nothing to overlook. Next, we have durability, which thankfully Darth Malak has a lot more lore covering. As mentioned, Jedi Alec was able to endure prolonged torture at the hands of Demigol, which left him with a total loss of body hair and an elongated spine. Demigol's journal also confirms that Alec persevered through irradiation, electroshock, and stress tests, as well as rating him higher on the Wyrick Index than any of his past victims, which included other Force users. Jumping to his Sith days, Malak's character sheet credits him with the ability to more or less ignore conventional physical or force damage for a short period, due to his body potentially being enhanced by alchemy. We even see this in-game when he shrugs off Bastula's saber throw attack and can give Revan one final monologue before succumbing to his injuries. However, this source also implies that Malak's impressive durability could instead be owed to his armor rather than alchemaic enhancement. Speaking of which, let's move into equipment. In addition to his jaw guard, Darth Malak wore a set of form-fitting red battle armor. There is no information available on the armor's construction, however, it did offer limited resistance to lightsaber blades, indicating that it was of high quality. His gray cape, robes, and knee-high boots were the same as any other, and his utility belt presumably carried the standardized KOTOR-era equipment. For weaponry, Malak wielded a single-bladed lightsaber with no special mechanisms. The saber produced the signature Sith red blade, which all but guaranteed that it was powered by a set of synthetic gems, enhancing the blade's cutting power at the expense of its handling. Shaak Ti was a female Togruta, and while her birth year is also unknown, there are some narrative implications that she was in a similar age group to Obi-Wan Kenobi, which would place her in her mid to late 50s or early 60s by the time of Force Unleashed. As noted in the aforementioned Essential Guide to Alien Species, Togrutas were an evolved race of carnivorous humanoids with their most notable attributes being their sharp canine teeth, bright complexions used to facilitate camouflage, and horn-like montrals that sat parallel to their heads. Despite their peaceful nature, Togrutans were well regarded as fierce combatants, with the hollow centers of their montrals granting them echolocation and spatial senses well beyond the galactic standard. These traits vastly buffed the Jedi Master's sense-based powers, which we'll be covering later. Despite being middle-aged by the standards of her species, Shaak's age is never stated or shown to hurt her physical stats. This makes sense considering that the power of the light side of the Force is consistently shown to preserve one's combative viability far beyond their in-real-life thresholds, with Jedi Masters such as Arca Jeth, Anya Kiro, and Yoda all achieving high-tier feats long after their youth had passed them by. Galen Merrick describes Shaak as old, but also strong and wily, with slews of other materials confirming that she continued her Jedi training during her exile, becoming stronger in the Force and with her lightsaber even as her body matured. There's also the rather obvious fact that ROTS Shaak and TFU Shaak look virtually identical, save a few wrinkles around the eyes, and even that's only in certain depictions. Shifting into physical strength, prequel Shaak could parry continuous dual blade attacks from General Grievous during the Battle of Hypori, albeit on the losing end. This is pretty impressive considering that Grievous was shown to be a Council tier fighter early in the Clone War, with Shaak herself being noted to have been exhausted before the fight had even begun. The Jedi Master is also implied to have clashed with Darth Vader during Operation Nightfall, which, although unseen, is still worth mentioning since Nightfall Vader is confirmed to be more powerful than Anakin Skywalker, who is stated to be the physically strongest Jedi by the time of Revenge of the Sith. Jumping to the Force Unleashed, Shaak Ti would stand her ground well against Galen Marek during their duel within the Ancient Abyss on Felucia. Galen was bewildered by the sheer power behind T's opening salvo, with the two having a fairly equal exchange of physical attacks throughout their duel. For reference, Galen is stated to have already been one of the most powerful Force adepts in the galaxy before his first mission in the game, which marks him as a supreme grade character. The Secret Apprentice would go on to become even stronger through his Sith Knighting and his battles with the Jedi Ram Koda and Kazdan Paratus, making T's ability to contend, let alone match his strength, nothing short of legendary. T's speed is easily her most impressive physical stat. She has numerous sources praising her accuracy and agility, with her ability to move and fight in crowded settings being considered extraordinary even by Jedi standards. Mace Windu also referred to her as the Master, one wanted by their side in chaotic circumstances, which is not insignificant praise. Feat-wise, Shaak was fast enough to keep pace with Felucia Galen Marek consistently, even taking the advantage at specific points. She also appeared to have a slight edge over him in terms of agility, given their betrayal, though obviously not enough to leverage a win. Still fucking impressive given the kind of monster Galen is. Moving into stamina, this is another stat that Master T has in abundance. She fought at the heart of numerous long-term military campaigns during the Clone Wars. However, her most notable prequel-era feat took place during the Battle of Coruscant, wherein she partook in a multi-hour race through the city in an effort to protect Chancellor Palpatine from General Grievous and his Magna Guards, even taking on an entire horde of the automatons by herself. She was burnt out by the end of it, but considering the sheer insanity of what she went through, the fact that she didn't drop dead by the first quarter is crazy. Regarding the TFU era, Shaak's battle with Galen is consistently depicted as a long and brutal affair, with the novelization heavily implying that the two were well matched in endurance, though Galen did appear to have a slight edge. Even with that consideration, this is still a monumental stamina feat for T, given that a weaker incarnation of Marek was able to endure high-intensity sparring sessions with Darth Vader for several hours on end before collapsing. Shaak's durability is also a stat that has been exemplified on numerous occasions. She has survived being shot in the chest, buried alive under a mound of rubble, and was unharmed by an explosion that knocked out Stas Ali. Although Felucia Galen's TK blasts and lightning storms were a big factor in T's death, the fact that she wasn't instantly pulped or vaporized does speak towards an incredible level of resilience. The Jedi Master was even able to hold on after getting stabbed through the abdomen by the Secret Apprentice's lightsaber, long enough to warn him that the whole Sith thing isn't all it's cracked up to be. Moving into equipment, the design of Shaak Ti's clothes are inconsistent across the different versions of the TFU story. However, she is most often depicted in Felucian garb, composed of vegetable material along with bones, ribbons, and decorative tassels. For weaponry, Ti wielded a single-bladed lightsaber, with its only unique design feature being that the hilt was made up of a combination of copper and durasteel, which buffed its versatility and tolerance to physical stress. The saber was powered by a single Adegan crystal, producing a blue blade of superb quality. This is the most straightforward verdict of this matchup, but solely because things are going to get a lot more complicated later. Darth Malak and Shaak Ti are both humanoids who can perform at an extremely high level of combat effectiveness, but the similarities basically end there when it comes to the portrayal of their physical stats and equipment. Shaak's Togrutan physiology grants her the advantages of camouflage, extra attack options in the form of her fangs, and a significantly heightened awareness of her surroundings thanks to the echolocation abilities of her montrals. Those first two attributes are somewhat countered by the video's settings and Malak's armor. However, the buff Ti's montrals give her speed, agility, and sense powers cannot be ignored. Malak has also never been shown fighting a Togrutan Jedi or an alien with similar attributes, meaning there is no frame of reference to draw on for how he would deal with it. Malak may not be as debilitated by dark side degradation as most Sith Lords of his status, but he is affected nonetheless, which is more than you can say for Ti. The Sith's cybernetics are also not game breakers given their internal nature. Shifting to physical strength, while Malak has more statements to draw from than Shaak, most of them are fairly basic, with his limitations becoming fairly plain to see when feats are factored in. He is, at best, nearly if not slightly stronger than KOTOR Jedi Revan in base and with his Starforge amp due to Karpyshyn's comments about their relativity and the extreme diff nature of their last battle. Impressive, but Ti has much more consistent strength feats against higher caliber foes. Clashing and escaping Nightfall Vader alone is enough to scale her above Malak, since ROTS Anakin is stated to be the physically strongest Jedi in the Old Order's history, which would include the Revan that beat Malak. Even if you want to discount that due to the ambiguity factor, TFU Shaak matching and occasionally overpowering Galen Merrick leads to the same conclusion. Felucia Galen should be above the stronger-than-Revan incarnation of Anakin given various statements, and his confirmed ability to spar extensively with Dark Times Vader, who had surpassed his prequel-era self before even meeting Galen. Strength Edge, Shaak Ti. Speed follows the same line of scaling. Darth Malak's showings are very impressive, and he is almost certainly on a similar tier to Jedi Revan by the end of the game. However, ROTS Anakin's combat speed is held in the same regard as his strength, which would put him above Revan, with Shaak escaping Nightfall Vader with her life intact. We don't know all the details of that escape, but again, that doesn't even really matter since Shaak's speed would eventually advance to where Galen was pressed to keep up with her, which is simply a higher tier feat than anything the KOTOR Sith has ever demonstrated or been credited with. Speed Edge, Shaak Ti. Stamina is an interesting mix. While there is a case to be made that Malak's and Shaak's final battles were similar in length, I do consider Shaak's showings to be the more impressive of the two. We get a much clearer idea of her stats, and although she is implied to have been below Merrick in endurance, it wasn't by much. And this was a stronger version of the apprentice who sparred Dark Times Vader for literal hours. Base Malak doesn't have any stamina feats even close to that. Starforge Malak, on the other hand, can replenish his HP at will, which, while a definite advantage, isn't without its flaws, since he can only use that ability a limited number of times before he runs out of Jedi. Stamina Edge, Shaak Ti. Durability is where these two align the closest. Both are noted for their survivability, and both have demonstrated the capability to fight through severe bodily trauma. Malak's armor, however, grants him an extra layer of protection that Ti lacks, and while not completely lightsaber-proof, the armor has withstood glancing attacks without issue. Durability Edge, Darth Malak. This segues nicely into equipment. As I just said, Malak's Sith armor buffs his defense far more than Shaak's Felucian garb. Weaponry follows a similar beat. Both utilize standard single-bladed lightsabers with no special mechanisms. However, Malak's Sith crystals do afford his energy blade more cutting power, as well as the possibility of overloading a Jedi saber's energy matrix, thereby causing it to short out. Weaponry edge, Darth Malak. Overall, while Darth Malak and Shaak Ti share a few equivalencies in their physical stats and equipment, the two are quite distant in their applications. Shaak's Togrutan traits grant her enhanced spatial senses in addition to having superior feats of strength, speed, and stamina. Malak has the edges in durability and weaponry, but they are only by small margins. And we know for a fact that armor and red blades are nothing new to this particular Jedi Master. I award Shaak Ti the edge in physical stats and equipment. Next, we shall analyze Darth Malak's and Shaak Ti's force power and abilities. Just to reiterate, I'm going to be examining Malak's force strength in both his base form and with his Starforge amp. I'm also going to address a line of scaling connected to the spirit of Exar Kun, which, while rife with lore inconsistencies, is still worth acknowledging. As noted by numerous sources, Darth Malak was one of the most powerful Dark Lords in Sith history, his legend enduring for millennia. Though weaker than Darth Revan as a Sith apprentice, he was still close enough to his master to be relative, having given Revan a desperate fight during his first coup attempt. After usurping the mantle of Dark Lord, Malak's command over the dark side would increase exponentially, with the Jedi Master Vandar Tokara stating that Malak's powers had surpassed Darth Revan's by the time of the first game. This is supported by his ability to battle end-of-game Jedi Revan, who is stated to be far more powerful than he had ever been as a Sith. For reference, Darth Revan is stated to have been, quote, the greatest Sith in generations by the KOTOR remake trailer, which would scale him above Prime Exar Kun while he was alive. Pre-Prime Exar would obliterate the spirit of Freedon Nad, who is stated to be more powerful than Naga Sadow, an ancient Sith that KOTOR 2's writer Chris Avallone has cited as being stronger than end-of-game Darth Nihilus. This scaling chain is corroborated by Mitra Surik, who flatly refers to pre-KOTOR Revan's command of the Force as being greater than anyone she had ever met, despite having already fought and defeated the Sith Triumvirate. Yeah. Darth Malak would become even more of a monster after absorbing the dark side energies of the Starforge. In this state, Malak is referred to as nearly unstoppable by the databank, with his character sheet stating that he wielded powers far greater than Exar Kun or Freedon Nad. He was even powerful enough to give Jedi Revan a fierce duel, who, as mentioned, far surpassed his Sith self at this point in the timeline. Finally, we have the Exar Kun Sith Spirit scaling, which, while inconsistent with the broader lore, is a discussion worth acknowledging. End of Jedi Academy Exar Kun, or Evolved Spirit Exar Kun as I like to call him, is easily one of the most powerful darkside entities in the franchise, with Luke and Leia comparing him directly to Darth Sidious during the time of Dark Empire. This makes sense considering that Spirit Exar had been feeding off the Force energies of Luke, his students, and Yavin 4 to amp his already considerable power level. Hell, Kip Duron alone was on par with Ben Kenobi and Yoda at the time, with Luke being stated to be stronger than ever. You add the rest of the Academy and Yavin on top of that, and it's honestly no surprise that Spirit XR would reach Sidious tier after draining them. Where things become convoluted is when we consider a statement made by Tales of the Jedi's author Tom Veitch, which claims that Exar Kun's Sith spirit was actually less powerful than when he was alive. This would, in turn, make Darth Revan and Darth Malak stronger than Darth Sidious at his peak. This line of scaling contradicts a fair bit of the verse. Even during the prequel era, Sidious has far too many statements of being the most powerful Sith to have ever existed to ignore. Darth Bane is also noted to have garnered more knowledge and power than any of the pre-Rule of Two Sith, which Exar, Revan, and Malak would fall into. We can also rationalize the inconsistencies of Veitch's statement with the idea that he was referring to the version of Exar's spirit that he wrote, which would be far weaker than the version featured in the Kevin J. Anderson trilogy, seeing as he had yet to siphon power from Luke, his students, and Yavin. So yeah, the idea that Darth Malak is more powerful than Darth Sidious doesn't make much sense, but I will acknowledge that the conversation is possible. Moving into abilities, Malak's telekinesis was sufficient to blast Diary clear across the Senate chamber, as well as throttle the life from multiple no-name Jedi simultaneously. His large-scale feats are few and far between, however, his prowess should be at least comparable to Darth Nihilus and Exar Kun, who could raise battleships from the surface of planets. Malak's signature TK technique was Force Whirlwind, which enabled him to summon a swirling vortex of air to trap a desired target, even bypassing KOTOR Revan's defenses. His character sheet also attributes him with Force Wound, a specialized telekinetic attack for causing severe bodily trauma. For telepathy, Malak could use mind tricks or dominate mind to warp the psyches of others, with Bastila Shan strongly implying that his range extended to other trained Force adepts. Speaking of which, while Malak is credited with an immunity to fear effects and mental interference, his threshold did have its limits, as he was unable to fully overcome the hypnotic influence of Emperor Vitiate. The Dark Lord could also utilize Battle Mind and Hatred to buff his combat stats, along with Force Fear to demoralize enemies. Shifting into the Sense branch, Darth Malak is frequently cited for his chilling sensitivity to the presence, emotions, and thoughts of other sentients, with his very thoughts sending ripples across the galaxy. This natural aptitude extended into Force Concealment and the obscure Force Warning, which is likely a variant of Danger Sense. Speaking of obscure powers, Malak could use the Force Scream to turn his voice into an ear-shattering sonic weapon, Dark Rage to buff his physical output, and the extremely rare Force Suppression, a neutral-aligned technique that allowed him to dampen the Force powers of other adepts. While there are instances of this technique being used to trick targets into believing they had been cut off from the Force entirely, thereby causing psychological trauma, whether or not Malak could use it to that effect is unknown. While various sources have confirmed that the dark side of the Force is less amicable to the healing arts, Malak likely retained some knowledge of the pain suppression techniques he showcased as a Jedi, in addition to his confirmed skills with the Dark Healing ability. Moving into energy, Darth Malak is a master of Force Lightning, utilizing the basic variant for targeted attacks, and the Lightning Chain to strike multiple targets simultaneously. His magnitude is largely unknown, however, his prowess should scale to or beyond the members of the Sith Triumvirate, who could harm KOTOR Council level adepts. The Dark Lord was also a master of Force Stun, immobilizing multiple targets simultaneously, including Supreme-grade characters like Jedi Revan. On the defensive front, Malak could utilize Energy Resistance, a lower-grade application of Tutaminis, to mitigate damage caused by energy, sonic, fire, cold, and electrical attacks. Next, we have dark side magic, an area in which Darth Malak possessed extensive knowledge due to his studies of Sith history and experimentation with the Starforge. That said, while he is credited with Sith sorcery and alchemy, he has never been shown using either of them in a combative setting, which makes his limits fairly unquantifiable. Finally, we come to arguably Darth Malak's ultimate Force power, Force Drain. Also known as Drain Life, Force Drain was a technique that involved a user tapping into the connections within the Force between all living things, and then siphoning that energy from a desired target to amp themselves. This could manifest anywhere from a subtle weakening of a foe's Force energy reservoir to straight up draining them dry until they were literally reduced to dust. Malak's most notable feat with Drain was when he used it in conjunction with the corrosive powers of the Starforge to enter his empowered state, feeding off the energies of 8 Jedi he had taken from Dantooine, killing them in the process. An impressive display, but whether or not he could drain planets or foes of equal or greater power is unknown, though I wouldn't put it past him. And even in that instance, Malak did have to keep draining the Jedi to keep his form going. Master Shaak Ti is credited by a large body of content as one of the most powerful members of the Jedi Council by the time of Revenge of the Sith, with her strength in the Force being referred to as legendary by the Clone Wars Adventures game. Pretty impressive given how many Supreme-grade characters made up that particular era of the Council. Ti's development as a combative Force user is very similar to those of Ben Kenobi and Yoda, as many more sources support the idea that she grew in power and understanding during her exile rather than the inverse. The Force Unleashed campaign guide states that in order to adapt to the new harsh state of the galaxy, the remaining Jedi were forced to adjust how they use the Force, with Shaak Ti being cited explicitly as an example of those who spent their days honing their skills in the Force, meditating, and practicing their lightsaber techniques in preparation for the rebellion against the Empire they all knew was coming. These accolades are corroborated by Shaak's training of Maris Brood and the Felucians, as well as her Force Unleashed incarnation demonstrating numerous new Force techniques unseen and uncredited to the character during the prequel era. Getting more centered, TFU Shaak is stated by Insider 140 to be far more powerful than Rom Koda and Kazdan Paratus, as well as being one of the most powerful Jedi in all of history. Bear in mind that Rom and Kazdan are also Order 66 survivors confirmed to have gotten stronger during the Dark Times, with each managing to harm versions of Galen Merrick with the Force. Speaking of which, Felucian Galen and Shaak are stated and shown to be on the same tier of power, though Galen was the stronger of the two. Felucian Galen may be weaker than the version of himself that fought Darth Vader on the Death Star, but his lore still speaks to Shaak's monstrous improvements. As mentioned earlier, Galen Merrick was already one of the most powerful Force users alive before his first mission in the game, eclipsing most of the Clone Wars Knights as a teenager, with it being stated that Vader was the only one who could consistently keep him in check. A Vader who had long since surpassed the power of ROTS Anakin, the strongest Jedi that had ever existed at that point. Not outlandish given that Galen is implied to have Force potential on par with Luke Skywalker, whose own potential surpassed his father's. The Secret Apprentice would go on to become even more powerful through his Sith knighting and his previous Jedi fights leading into his mission to Felucia. So, yeah, the old Togrutan clearly improved a lot if that's what she's competing with. Moving into abilities, Shaak Ti has demonstrated many impressive feats of telekinesis, such as hurling large chunks of rubble and engine components while exhausted, helping to hold back the force of Kamino's ocean, and blasting away Galen Merrick at the Ancient Abyss. Her TK should as well scale above those of Kazdan Paratus and Galen during their fight, with the former being a confirmed telekinetic savant, and the latter remarking how easy it would be to bring down the Junk Temple, which was roughly the size of the Coruscant Temple. Her control was also sufficient to deflect thrown objects hurled at her by Galen Marek, as well as parry his direct force blasts. T's character sheet also credits her with Force Slam, Force Thrust, and Force Strike. Pretty self-explanatory. For telepathy, Shaak was a seasoned master of mind tricks and beast control, being able to influence multiple force-sensitive psyches at a time, and direct the Mega Sarlacc into attacking Marek. The Jedi Master was also able to negate Marek's attempts to goad the Sarlacc into attacking her, strongly implying that she possessed some degree of fear effects and mental interference immunity. T's telepathic repertoire also included Battle Mind during the Clone War, which she evolved into the potent Battle Meditation during her training on Felucia. Shifting into the Sense branch, this is an area in which Shaak Ti particularly excelled, thanks in no small measure to the echolocation and spatial sensibilities granted by her montrals. Her attunement to the locations, emotions, and thoughts of others is routinely noted to be extraordinary, even by the standards of other Jedi Masters. Her danger sense is also implied to surpass that of Quinlan Vos, which is not a low-tier achievement. For stealth, Shaak was highly skilled at masking her aura from other Force users, having successfully hidden her presence from Galen Marek, with it being implied that he could not do the same from her. In keeping with her people's tribal hunting origins, T could unleash Force screams that could be heard for miles to signal allies to her location, with the sheer power behind them sending Marek careening backwards. On a less aggressive note, one of TFU Shaak's signature techniques was Plant Surge, a light side ability that enabled her to command large swaths of flora and fauna to attack a desired target, which on a world like Felucia was truly devastating. As mentioned, whereas Darksiders generally struggled when it came to mastering the healing arts, Lightsiders like Shaak Ti had no such limitations. There are many instances of the Jedi Master using Force healing during the Clone Wars, even when subject to damage that would be fatal to most. By the time of Force Unleashed, Shaak had mastered the art of hibernation trances, with her conventional healing abilities advancing to where she could more or less auto-regenerate on the fly. In the realm of energy powers, Shaak could summon and mold lightning-like force energy into a restrained sphere, which could then be thrown at an enemy, strongly implying that she mastered a light side variant of the technique known as kinetite. Regarding potency, T's kinetite could obliterate chunks of the Mega Sarlacc and cause severe damage to supreme-grade fighters such as Galen Marek. The Jedi also shared Malak's mastery of Force Stun, though her range is unknown. On the defensive front, Shaak was a high-level master of Tutaminis, having used it to deflect a lightsaber strike from General Grievous and repel barrages of Galen Marek's Sith lightning. Finally, while not an ability in the strictest sense, it is worth acknowledging that Shaak Ti's connection to nature was so profound that her presence alone saturated Felucia in the energies of the light side, with the planet succumbing to darkness immediately after her death. Some have taken this dynamic to mean that Shaak was amped while fighting Galen. However, not only is that never stated, but the lore frames it as more of her being the focal point of the energies that kept the darkness from consuming the world, rather than her drawing on an external source of power. If anything, you could argue she was nerfed fighting on a planet with so much darkness just below the surface. I don't personally believe that, I think she just evened things out. However, if true, that definitely adds an extra notch to her legendary status. Like I said before, this is where things start to get complicated. Starting with raw power, the dynamic between Darth Malak and Shaak Ti is entirely dependent on which line of scaling one uses to assess Malak. If we follow the more consistent line of power scaling, then TFU Shaak is far more powerful than Malak, both in base and with his Starforge amp. As I mentioned in his breakdown, Malak and the rest of the ancient Sith are confirmed to have been surpassed by the Rule of Two line, which grows in power with every generation, with Maul's battle against Qui-Gon on Tatooine being proof that the Sith were deadlier than ever. Vader and Sidious surpassed Maul and would only grow in power through the Dark Times. This is the class of Sith to which Galen Marek belonged, with Shaak only being slightly below him. Frankly, even if we downplay Shaak's growth between ROTS and TFU, she would still at least be a full tier or two above Malak, since, again, she simply scales to a higher caliber of Sith. However, if you go with Darth Malak's line of scaling tied to the spirit of Exar Kun, then his power would be on a completely different level compared to TFU Shaak's, regardless of the Starforge. KOTOR Malak is confirmed to be above Darth Revan, who is confirmed to be above Exar Kun while he was alive. Alive Exar is allegedly more powerful than Spirit Exar according to Tom Veitch, which scales him above Dark Empire Darth Sidious. This would rank Malak's power several tiers above Shaak, since DE Sidious far surpasses TFU Sidious, whom Prime Galen Marek couldn't really do much against. Still though, possibility doesn't equate to consistency. Like I said earlier, Malak being more powerful than DE Sidious doesn't make sense in the broader context of the lore, with even Veitch's statement being justifiable with the idea that he was referring to the version of Exar's spirit he wrote, which was objectively weaker than the version Anderson wrote, given the context of the story. The Sith's growth from KOTOR to the prequels and Dark Times is pretty blatant, and Shaak is a powerhouse in both eras, regardless of where you think she may fall. Raw Power Edge, Shaak Ti. Moving into abilities, both characters are confirmed to possess extensive knowledge of the Force and have access to numerous conventional and esoteric techniques. Shaak's telekinetic skill, feats, and scaling all surpass those of Malak, even with his comparisons to Nihilus and Exar. This dynamic wouldn't change if we set aside showings and just examined power, given the Jedi Master's aforementioned advantages. Telepathy is a tie in most settings, but can be slightly skewed in favor of T in 1. Both can affect the psyches of other Force adepts with their basic abilities, and both are credited with Battle Mind. Both are also confirmed or heavily implied to be capable of somewhat resisting the mental manipulation of others. T's battle meditation has also been shown in other works to be a viable counter to Malak's Force fear, hatred, and mind domination. This applies both in a neutral setting and on the Starforge. However, the Jedi Master's beast control does provide her an edge in scenarios where this fight takes place on Felucia, as it did in the canon storyline. Sense abilities have little influence in a battle on neutral ground beyond the facilitation of physical combat, and concealment techniques have almost no impact whatsoever, though, credit where it's due, Shaak Ti definitely takes the edge in each. Both can also utilize Force Scream, so that cancels out. Malak's Dark Rage is an amp to his physical and power stats, which we've already covered, and his skills in combative Sith magic are almost impossible to gauge. His Force Suppression and Force Drain, on the other hand, offer a myriad of possibilities, as both have the potential to shrink the gap between himself and his more powerful adversary. On the opposite side of the Force, Shaak's Plant Surge would be useless in a neutral setting or on the Starforge, but it would provide a significant asset on Felucia. In regards to the healing arts, Darth Malak does have impressive range for a Sith, but Shaak Ti's light side affiliation grants her an inherent affinity for these kinds of powers, with the Jedi Master also showcasing a much higher magnitude of talents, further cementing her advantage. Energy-based powers are interesting. Both have Force Stun, so again, that cancels out. The debate between Sith Lightning and Kinetite has persisted for years, as it comes down to individual application. With that in mind, while Malak does require less charge-up time to unleash his lightning attacks, his demonstrated magnitude is far lower than Shaak's Kinetite blasts. Same goes for their defensive techniques. Malak has energy resistance, a lower grade application of Tutaminis that, in all probability, only provides a limited protection against Force Lightning and Kinetite. Shaak just straight up has Tutaminis, and if she can dispel Galen Merrick's Sith Lightning, then there's little doubt she could do the same to Malak's. This is extremely close. Both combatants possess robust arsenals of Force techniques, with powers ranging from conventional to unconventional amongst the Jedi and Sith. Malak and Shaak also share multiple abilities between them in addition to powers that directly counter each other. There is also the fact that specific techniques can vary drastically in effectiveness depending on the settings in which this fight takes place. If we're talking spheres of power that are effective across the board, I would say Shaak has more going for her, given her superior TK, healing, and energy. Malak's suppression and force drain, however, do compensate a bit, even if I don't see them as being enough to give him the win. Abilities edge, tie. Overall, while Darth Malak is owed a lot more credit as a combative force wielder than he is typically dealt, especially given certain avenues of scaling, he is not without his shortcomings. Shaak Ti possesses far greater raw power, with her energies clashing with the Sith well above Malak regardless of the Starforge, is at bare minimum equal in skill, and matches him at every front when it comes to force techniques. I award Shaak Ti the edge in force power and abilities. Next, we shall analyze Darth Malak's and Shaak Ti's lore, combat feats, and scaling. As mentioned in previous segments, Malak was the strongest Sith alive during Knights of the Old Republic 1. He is stated by Drew Karpyshyn to have been, quote, even better than Revan with a lightsaber, which is supported by Malak giving Revan a desperate fight in his first coup. To say that these are impressive accolades is a rather large understatement, given that Darth Revan was one of the most formidable Sith combatants in history, surpassing Exar Kun, in addition to the fact that Malak got stronger after becoming Sith Master. Moving into fighting styles, Darth Malak's primary martial arts discipline is unknown. However, his profile in the miniatures game describes him as a straightforward saber combatant with a predilection for attacking his foes head-on, which could indicate training in Shi-Cho, Shien, or Juyo. True to these statements, Malak's offensive technique was centered around power, utilizing dynamic flourishes coupled with bisecting slashes to overwhelm an opponent's defenses. His defensive technique combined grounded blocks with acrobatic dodges, forcing foes to chase after him. This focus on frontal assault gave Malak's style an edge against styles that were simplistic, though it also put him at a disadvantage against styles that were defensive or dexterity-driven. The Dark Lord was also adept at integrating physical and force attacks into his combat sequences, often favoring Whirlwind, Stun, and Sith Lightning. Tactically, one of Malak's core character traits in opposition to Revan was his lack of subtlety, forethought, and over-reliance on brute force, which we see firsthand. Still, being below Revan as a strategist isn't exactly an anti-feat. Malak has routinely demonstrated himself to be a quick thinker, being particularly skilled at using environmental factors to jockey for advantage, as well as separating groups in order to pick them apart one by one. He was also a fan of Dune Moke, using verbal taunts to sow distraction and doubt within an enemy's head to keep them from bringing their full strength to bear, though he was quick to frustration himself. Moving into feats, Darth Malak's most notable showing against another Force adept was his final battle with Jedi Revan at the climax of Knights of the Old Republic 1. The two fought aboard the Starforge with their lightsabers and Force powers alike. While hard fought on both sides, Revan was the one to emerge victorious, Malak succumbing to his injuries and finally passing into the Force. Now, much like any fight shown solely in a video game, this feat has several ambiguities surrounding its canon rendition. The most lore-consistent interpretation is that base form Malak clashed with Revan, but broke off when it became evident that he couldn't win, which was when he decided to tap into the Forge to take on his empowered state. While this amp enabled Malak to perform much better, with the fight being called a fierce duel by the SWTOR Encyclopedia, and a brutal, hard-fought affair spread over multiple pages by Karpyshyn, Revan was still able to come out on top, with the Jedi Civil War finally brought to an end. Despite the loss and ambiguities, Darth Malak's final battle with Revan still speaks very well of his combative abilities. As I've stated at numerous points in this video, end-of-game Jedi Revan was far stronger than Darth Revan had ever been, with his Sith incarnation already being near the apex of his era. Malak pushing a Jedi on that tier to an extreme diff is astounding, even if it wasn't quite enough to win. Malak's use of the Starforge to replenish and amplify himself is also an excellent example of how he could utilize specific battlefields in a tactically advantageous way, though, again, not without its limits. As I previously covered, Shaak Ti was a formidable warrior even by the standards of the Jedi High Council, with Obi-Wan Kenobi comparing the stylish grace of her Makashi mastery to that of Count Dooku. Grace isn't the same as raw skill, but still an insane accolade. Like with her Force powers, ROTS Shaak has many statements putting her fighting abilities amongst the best of the prequel era, with her character sheet and UK Magazine 6 both stating that the Jedi, quote, revere Shaak Ti as one of the highest of their order, and one of the most accomplished in lightsaber combat. After Order 66, Shaak would continue her lightsaber and Force training on Felucia, adapting to the world's dangerous climate, and unlocking a plethora of new abilities, becoming far stronger than she had ever been during the Clone Wars. Her skills during Force Unleashed were sufficient to match those of Felucia Galen Merrick, with the novelization confirming that she was one of the few Jedi Masters whom Darth Vader respected, albeit begrudgingly. These are insane lore buffs for Shaak, since Galen is stated to have all but perfected the fine art of lightsaber combat before the game, along with Vader growing massively in strength since his time as Anakin Skywalker. Moving into fighting styles, T is credited with mastery of Makashi and Ataru, blending them into a personalized hybrid technique. Also known as the contention form, Makashi was explicitly designed for saber-to-saber dueling, with the style's emphasis on precision allowing Shaak to utilize her dexterity to her best advantage, albeit at the cost of power. Ataru, also known as the aggression form, was about utilizing one's entire body as a weapon, with the style's focus on fast-paced acrobatics enabling Shaak to maximize her heightened spatial senses at the cost of control. Her offensive technique was centered around efficiency, utilizing grounded thrusts coupled with lightning-fast slashes to dissect and overwhelm an opponent's defenses. Her defensive technique was a mix of heavy blocks, blade binding, and subtle dodges to stonewall foes, forcing them to wear themselves out or overextend. This mix of elegance and aggression made Shaak's hybrid style very effective against bombastic styles like Shicho and Juyo. However, it still lacked somewhat in kinetic energy, which appeared to put her at a disadvantage against defensive styles like Sarisu and pinpoint strength styles like Djem So. That said, all of these mechanics could be compensated for with training, and only really came into play when she fought opponents on or near her skill level. The Council Master was also skilled at integrating physical and force attacks into her combat sequences, TK, Beast Trick, and Kinetite often being her powers of choice. Tactically, Shaak Ti has numerous statements praising her strategic prowess, with ROTS Obi-Wan citing her as the most cunning Jedi he had ever met, which is not a casual designation. She had no difficulty keeping track of multiple variables in the heart of a chaotic battle, nor did she ever struggle with thinking on her feet when faced with unexpected failure. The Jedi Master also appeared to be a user of Sokan, which is essentially light-side Dune Moke. The best example being when she called Vader a coward to Galen's face and exposed the inherent flaws of thinking in absolutes to psych him out. She was also unafraid of sacrificing her life if it meant she could take her enemy down with her, though this strategy obviously carried major risks. Moving into Feats, we have Shaak Ti's battle with Darth Vader during Operation Nightfall. Now, this fight has sparked considerable debate amongst fans, as it has never been illustrated in any medium, with some even questioning its existence entirely. However, I believe there is sufficient evidence from supporting materials to conclude that not only did this fight occur, but we can also infer a few variables. The Revenge of the Sith novelization depicts Vader actively searching for Shaak when the attack on the temple began, which makes sense given that she was the strongest Jedi Master stationed there at the time. Issue 51 of the official Starships and Vehicles collection states that, quote, Shaak Ti was at the Jedi Temple when Vader attacked it and narrowly escaped death there. Her TFU bio expands on this, stating, quote, she quickly rallied other Jedi and fought bravely to repel the attack, but it was soon obvious that the temple would be lost. After ensuring that several Padawans and their masters escaped, Shaak Ti too reluctantly fled on her own. Arguably the most significant piece of evidence for this fight's existence comes from the TFU comic adaptation, which depicts Shaak knowing that Darth Vader used to be Anakin Skywalker, which she realistically wouldn't have had any way of knowing unless the two had an encounter. Considering all of that lore, I think the best way to infer this feat would be as follows. Shaak Ti clashed with Darth Vader during Operation Nightfall, but it quickly became clear that he was too strong for her to win. This forced the Jedi Master to retreat, which she did successfully, even managing to help some of her peers along the way. Bear in mind that Anakin Skywalker was a Mace and Yoda tier fighter at the beginning of ROTS, with his fall to the dark side making him even more powerful. We may not know any of the hard facts, but T being able to clash with Nightfall Vader and escape him successfully is nothing to overlook. And it goes to show why the Dark Lord still held a begrudging respect for her so many years later. Jumping ahead 16 years, Shaak Ti would battle Galen Marek halfway through Force Unleashed 1. This is another fight known mainly for its video game adaptation. However, unlike Malak v Revan, the variables of Shaak v Galen are much easier to assess, as we also have comic and novel adaptations to draw from. The two clashed within the heart of the ancient abyss, utilizing the full scope of their skills as swordsmen and their mastery of the Force. Although the flow was initially pretty even, with T taking the advantage at specific points thanks to outside help, Galen's sheer tenacity ultimately won out, freezing the Jedi Master's saber mid-attack, giving him an opening to stab her through the stomach. Shaak would then offer one final warning to the secret apprentice before passing into the Force, her body erupting in a fountain of light-side energy. Given the mechanics and length of this battle, quite a few variables can be observed. The first is that Galen admits that he only beat Shaak by a hair, stating that he was, quote, shocked by how close he had come to death and how lucky he had been to defeat her, with the novel showing quite clearly that her skills were sufficiently advanced to combat his own. Next, Shaak did have outside aid at specific points in this battle, though I must stress that the amount of assistance varies between depictions. In the games, she gets help from the Sarlacc and several Felucian warriors. In the comic, it's just the Sarlacc. In the novel, it's also just the Sarlacc, but its involvement is noticeably reduced. Finally, While some like to downplay Shaak's performance against Galen with the assertion that she was amped on Felucia, like I said in her Force section, this has never been confirmed in the lore, and if anything could be argued in reverse given the planet's dark side leanings. Despite these many variables, Shaak Ti's battle with Galen Merrick is still awe-inspiring. Both were going all out, and it was anything but a one-sided match. Galen was a Supreme Grade Sith and Master Sword Fighter long before his mission to Felucia, supporting Ti's aforementioned scaling, and making her ability to push him to an extreme diff a feat very few adepts could even attempt. This match has been a unique one to say the least, but I think you can all see where I'm leaning at this point. Darth Malak is worthy of his status as one of the greatest figures in Sith history, and there is no question he would slaughter the greats of various eras regardless of the Starforge. However, when it comes to a battle against the graceful but deadly Shaak Ti, Malak is unfortunately more prey than hunter. Both characters can be said to have multiple avenues of martial and force scaling, but none that make this matchup unquantifiable. Starting with their fighting techniques, the two were vastly different. Both were well versed in numerous disciplines. However, Malak is a straightforward attack-centric duelist, whereas Shaak focuses on precision and economy of motion. Each style has been shown to be a viable counter to the other. However, if Shaak's skills were sufficient to stress Galen Merrick, then Malak definitely isn't bringing anything to the table she can't handle. This is especially the case given Galen's scaling, along with how much more simplistic the KOTOR Sith's methods are in comparison. Skill edge, Shaak Ti. Tactics aren't really much of a debate. To be clear, Malak's not an idiot, and his being below Revan in this field is not an anti-feat. However, his accolades for strategic insight are noticeably lower than Ti's, and this is evident in their portrayals. Both are highly experienced and quick thinkers who excel at making the most of their environments. The difference is that Shaak has demonstrated more creativity in her strategies, and, unlike Malak, has consistently kept her cool when unexpected variables arise. Tactical edge, Shaak Ti. Finally, we have Feats. Darth Malak's performance against Jedi Revan is extremely impressive. However, it's not actually on the same tier as Shaak's bouts with Darth Vader and Galen Merrick. Anakin Skywalker was the strongest Jedi in the history of the Old Order by the time of Revenge of the Sith, which scales him above the Revan that Malak lost to. Nightfall Vader is stated to be more powerful than Anakin, whom Shaak Ti was weaker than, but was still able to escape successfully. Even if we discount the Nightfall stuff due to its ambiguities, Ti still got stronger during the Dark Times leading into Force Unleashed. Speaking of which, Merrick, even during his mission to Felucia, should still scale above Malak due to various statements and the power cliffing of the Rule of Two Sith. Merrick grows stronger later in the story, eventually developing to the point where he could battle TFU Darth Vader, but given just how massively Vader had eclipsed his ROTS self at that point in the timeline, I see little reason to assume Felucia Merrick wasn't also above KOTOR Revan, and he admits that he only beat TFU Shaak by a hair. Feats edge, Shaak Ti. Overall, while Darth Malak and Shaak Ti are both combatants with truly devastating potential, Shaak is simply on a different tier, possessing a higher level of skill, better tactical viability, and more impressive combat feats and scaling. That is, unless you go with the idea of Ghost Exar Kun being weaker than a live Exar Kun, in which case everything I just said is null and void, since that line of scaling makes Malak more powerful than Dark Empire Sidious. TFU Shaak isn't winning against New Hope Darth Vader or Ben Kenobi, much less Sidious at his peak. Fortunately for her, that line of scaling is way too inconsistent with the lore to be considered fact, and therefore will not be taken as such. Moving into the battle itself, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm going to offer 3 frames of reference for how Darth Malak vs. Shaak Ti would play out. first in a neutral setting, then one where they fight on the Starforge, and finally one on Felucia. Starting with a neutral setting, I would say the closest equivalent to a fight between Malak and Shaak would be Count Dooku's battle with Yoda on Geonosis, from Chapter 24 of the Attack of the Clones novel by R.A. Salvatore, with Malak playing the part of Dooku and Shaak standing in for Yoda. The fight would be incredible, but it wouldn't last very long, with Shaak's superior skill and power enabling her to counter everything Malak throws at her as the KOTOR Sith grows more frustrated by the second. Once she senses an opening, Shaak would switch to a more aggressive sequence and dismantle Malak, cutting him down with precision and grace. Next, we have the Starforge setting. Let's say that in this scenario, Shaak Ti and her army from Felucia have invaded the battle station and are waging an all-out assault to take down Malak. Would Ti be able to make it through the gauntlet of the Starforge and kill Malak like Revan did in the game? I see no reason why not. Her will is more than strong enough to fight through the oppressing energies of the Forge, and there are no enemies aside from Malak himself who would give her any real trouble. I can see her Force-drained Felucians being more than a match for the Sith troopers and droids, with Maris Brood making relatively light work of the Sith acolytes. Maris has actually been directly compared to Asajj Ventress, so even Shadowhand Bastila isn't likely to stop her. Once Shaak made it to the final chamber, her battle with Malak would follow many of the same beats as the one I described in the neutral setting. Malak transforming into his empowered state would prolong the battle, and he would likely get in some solid hits. However, like with Revan, Shaak would be too formidable a force for the Sith to overcome, and Malak would meet his end like he did in the original timeline. Finally, we have the Felucia setting, which would unfold a lot like the original game, but with the exact opposite outcome. Darth Malak would be able to fight his way through the jungles, slaughtering warriors, rancors, and flora alike. Once he made it to the Ancient Abyss, Malak's battle with Shaak would, again, follow many of the same beats described in the neutral setting. However, this one would likely be the shortest of the battle scenarios, since not only would Malak be faced with a more formidable opponent, but Shaak would have total control over the environment, plus backup she could summon at a moment's notice. Yeah. I declare Shaak Ti, the Huntress, the victor. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of the Versus Series Season 8. As always, please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments section below. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.